Sometimes I think we forget that the enemy is not, he's clever, but he does the same tactics and the same strategies over and over and over again. So I'll give you an example. Like if we go back to, well, let's refer to, for instance, those of you who are standing for your marriage promise, for marriage restoration. If we go all the way back to in the garden, Satan came and tempted Eve. Are you sure the Lord said you weren't supposed to eat from this fruit? Let's take it to when Jesus, right after he was baptized and the Holy Spirit led him through the wilderness and Satan tempted him after he came off of his fast. Are you sure you're the Son of God? Are you really the Son of God? If you are, throw yourself from this mountain, turn a stone into bread. The devil is doing the same thing with many of us, with many of you today. Are you sure God told you to stand for your marriage? Are you sure God said he's going to restore your marriage? Are you sure that's your husband? Are you sure that's your wife? Are you sure you heard God correctly? You see what I'm saying? So if we take it back to that, if we even take it back to that, he's not coming up with anything new. He's doing the same things he's done from the beginning. And I will say this, I talk about this a lot on my coaching calls. One of the surest ways and easiest ways to get out of the will of God or to get out of alignment is to move based on assumption. And like I said, that's where the enemy meets us. He doesn't want me to get this out. You see how I'm fumbling with this, but devil, I rebuke you. He tries to get us based on moving in assumption. Because I prayed this to God and asked God, God, is this my husband? God, is this my God ordained spouse? God, are you saying this is my kingdom marriage? The enemy will meet you right there. So while you petition God with that and you're praying to God for that, the enemy is in your ear. Are you sure God told you this was your spouse? Are you sure God said he was going to restore? And because God is silent now we assume because he's silent, maybe he didn't say it. And what do? We get up and go with the alternative route. We go with the 20%. We go with what looks right, what feels right, what seems right. But I've said this before, when it comes to reasoning and logic, science, what makes sense, you got to take all of that out. Because when it comes to God, his kingdom is like upside down to the world. You got to be willing to unlearn and then allow Holy Spirit to teach you how to have a coachable and teachable spirit, so therefore you can relearn, rethink, and rebuild. So just because God has not answered you, did y'all see that? Thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you, Holy Spirit. God is so good. Just because God has not answered you does not mean God is not in it. Just because God is silent does not mean God is not in it. Just because you haven't seen his hand in it and no movement does not mean that you didn't hear God right. But we have to get out of moving in assumption because God is quiet, because he didn't say anything. Maybe he meant this. Those maybes are going to get you out of the will of God. Those maybes are going to get your feelings hurt. If God has not given you instructions, if he has not given you strategies, thank you, Holy Spirit, if he has not given you an exit strategy, if he has not said anything different about what you're currently in, stay your tail right where you're at until God reveals more, until God says more. Sometimes we're guilty of, and I say we because I had to learn this too, we're guilty of getting up before the Lord is finished speaking. And I did a message about this before, about the sisters of the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha. Martha was up tending to things. Mary was at Jesus's feet, taking it all in of what he was revealing, speaking, just being in his presence. Sometimes you're in your Mary season. The Lord may not be saying anything to you, but he's expecting you to still be at his feet. He will continue speaking, even if he doesn't. Thank you, Holy Spirit. I feel your presence. Even if he doesn't say any more, stay at his feet until you know, because when it's God, it will never be forced. It will never be rushed. It will not feel like, oh my gosh, I got to make a decision. I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to get out of this. Even when God is giving you an exit strategy, it comes with peace. It's not a rush situation. So I just want to encourage you guys, get out of reasoning and logic. Go back to the beginning of the Bible. Satan, what he's doing now, he did all the way back then. Are you sure this? Are you sure this? Did you hear that right? So bind and rebuke that and come out of agreement with that. And just because God isn't speaking or hasn't said anything does not mean that's his answer. His silence doesn't necessarily mean that's his answer. Sit there and wait for God to instruct you. Wait for God to direct you. He's going to show up and reveal something, but will you be where you're supposed to be when he does show up? Or are you off taking all these other options and all these other alternatives because you were too impatient to wait on the Lord's timing? You were too impatient to sit there and wait even while he was testing your heart to see, do you want your promise more than a promise keeper? So y'all, stay where you're supposed to be until you hear God tell you more, lead you differently, tell you otherwise. Okay?